What if the most famous rule book in human history was actually designed with the absolute certainty that you were going to break, like every single rule?
Right, which is completely counterintuitive to how we normally think about it.
Exactly. I mean, think about how we usually approach ancient religious texts, right? Especially law codes. We bring this very, I don't know, very modern, very Western expectation to them.
Oh, absolutely. We want a spreadsheet.
Yeah. We want a spreadsheet. We expect this rigid, static precision. It's almost like an instruction manual for assembling some highly complicated, very unforgiving piece of furniture. You follow step A to get to step B, and if you miss one single screw,
The entire bookshelf just collapses on you.
right, and you're left sitting on the floor with some Allen wrench, completely defeated.
It's a really common approach, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Treating the text as this purely mechanical transaction. You know, a ladder of merit that you are supposed to climb, run by sweat-inducing rung to reach the top.
And the logic seems so straightforward, doesn't it? Like, you do the right things, you earn the good standing, you break a rule, you get penalized.
It's clean. It's binary.
Clean, binary, and honestly, if you're the one actually trying to climb that ladder, it is utterly exhausting. But, and this is where today's topic comes in, when you step into the actual literary world of the Torah, so the first 5 books of the Bible, suddenly that instruction manual is doing something entirely different.
Yeah, completely different. We aren't looking at a static list of demands anymore.
Right. We're looking at a landscape that is deeply, deeply dynamic. And we are going to dive into this today. We're looking at a fascinating essay by Mark Bates from Rabbit Room Apologetics, and it's titled The Torah as Prophetic Narrative.
It's a brilliant piece. It completely shatters our modern desire to, put everything into these neat, predictable legal categories.
Which we love doing.
We really do. But that's the massive paradigm shift we're exploring in this deep dive. Our mission today for you, the listener, is to pull back the curtain on how the Torah actually functions. Because we're going to unpack how it isn't just a static statutory code. It is, like the title says, a prophetic narrative.
A prophetic narrative.
Right. Deliberately designed by Moses to anticipate Israel's inevitable failure and to point the reader forward to a future Messiah king.
I really want us to lean into that, shifting from this rigid rule book view to experiencing it as a prophetic story. And to understand why the Torah isn't just a legal code, the essay argues we have to look at the macro architecture of the text itself, specifically how Moses framed the story at its very beginning and its very end, like the bookends of the whole collection.
Yes, the bookends. Because in ancient Hebraic literary composition, the interpretive keys to understanding a massive work world are often placed right at the boundaries. And Moses creates this undeniable canonical symmetry of failure.
Okay, a symmetry of failure. Let's trace how that actually works in the text.
We'll consider the opening boundary, right? Genesis chapters 1 through 11. It establishes universal human failure on a grand scale. We start with this beautiful creation of ordered sacred space in Eden, but almost immediately we get a cascading avalanche of compounding rebellions.
Each one after another.
Exactly. You have the original fracture in Eden, then you have the cosmic, frankly bizarre rebellions of the Nephilim in Genesis 6.
Oh, yeah, that whole strange narrative.
Right, and then you culminate with the massive human hubris of the Tower of Babel. So these aren't just isolated fables. They are the architectural setup for the human condition.
So by the time we even get to the story of Abraham and the nation of Israel, the world is already thoroughly broken. Like, the baseline is disorder.
The baseline is completely fractured. And then you look at the concluding boundary of the Torah, Deuteronomy chapters 29 through 34.
Right, the end of the journey.
Exactly. Moses is delivering his final, sweeping addresses on the plains of Moab before he dies. But he concludes this massive 5-book epic, not with some triumphant, victorious march into the sunset, but with a literal prediction of national failure.
Which is wild. He basically stands there and says, look, I know exactly what you're going to do once you cross this river, and it isn't good.
What's fascinating here is that Moses frames the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, not with some pristine age of innocence awaiting a simple set of rules. He frames it within a history of deep-seated compounded disorder. Sinai was never meant to be the ultimate fix for that original fracture that happened in Genesis 3.
It wasn't the cure.
No, it was always meant to be instructional scaffolding within a much larger promise plan that God had already set in motion with Abraham centuries earlier.
Okay, let's unpack this because this brings up a huge tension for me. If Moses plainly tells the Israelites in Deuteronomy 31 that he knows they're going to act corruptly and that they will face exile because I think he says in chapter 29 they lack a circumcised heart to actually obey.
Yes, exactly. An uncircumcised heart.
Right. So wasn't the law just a fatalistic trap? I mean, I hear the essay saying it's instructional scaffolding, but if a teacher hands out a final exam knowing for an absolute fact that every single student in the room is going to fail, that feels incredibly cruel. Like, how is that not just a divine setup?
I get that. It looks like a cruel setup if you assume the goal of the test was for the students to pass it on their own autonomous merit.
Okay.
But that isn't metaphysical fatalism or a trap. The tension is entirely pedagogical. Moses still genuinely summons the people to choose life. So human agency and responsibility, they're very real. But Yahweh is employing the exposed, inevitable failure of these conditional structures to drive the story forward.
So the failure itself is the lesson.
Precisely. The inevitable failure of an uncircumcised, unchanged human heart trying to live under the weight of a perfect law. It proves that human striving is simply not enough. It forces the ancient reader and Israel themselves to look back to that unconditional promise God already gave to Abraham and to look forward to a divine internal solution.
Okay, so if the law isn't the ultimate fix, and failure is literally written into the script by Moses from the start, where does the text tell the reader to find hope? Because it wouldn't make sense for a prophetic narrative to just leave us hanging in despair, right? Moses must point to a specific future.
He does. And he does it brilliantly through structural poetic seams.
Poetic seams.
Yeah, so Moses inserted major, highly elevated poetic blocks at very decisive narrative seams throughout the Torah. You see this vividly in Genesis 49, Numbers 24, and Deuteronomy 31. And there was a vital Hebrew phrase tying these specific poems together.
Which is?
Acherit HaYamim.
Acherit HaYamim, which translates roughly to the end of days or the last days, right?
Exactly. It points to an eschatological horizon, like a future culmination. These poems function as a compositional commentary on the historical narrative surrounding them. When the historical characters are fumbling and failing, the poems intentionally shift the reader's gaze away from Israel's present inability, lifting their eyes toward a future royal figure who will arise in those last days.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. When you look at the specific clues embedded in these poems, it's wild. In Genesis 49, Jacob gathers his sons around his deathbed, right? He's prophesying what will happen in the last days, and out of all of them, he singles out Judah, saying the scepter will not depart from him.
A royal scepter.
Yeah.
And that threads perfectly into Numbers 24.
Yes. You have Balaam, who, by the way, is this hired pagan sorcerer whose own donkey had more spiritual insight than he did.
Which adds such a brilliant layer of irony to the whole thing.
It really does. God compels this pagan outsider to speak of the last days, and Balaam prophesies a star coming out of Jacob, a scepter from Israel, exercising dominion. It's exactly like reading a masterful mystery novel. Well, the author is dropping these blatant clues about a hero who hasn't even entered the story yet. The current characters on the page are completely fumbling the case. But the author keeps panning the camera over to these glowing poetic clues, kind of whispering to the reader, keep your eyes peeled for the guy with the scepter from the line of Judah. He's the one who is actually going to solve this.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Moses is relocating the ultimate hope for the reader. He refuses to leave you stranded at the foot of Mount Sinai with a list of rules you just can't keep. He points you to Acherit HaYamim, when an anointed king will arrive to actually restore the massive blessing that was originally promised to Abraham.
But Moses didn't just rely on explicit poetic interruptions to point to the future, did he? Because the essay points out that he actually encoded prophetic patterns into the historical events themselves. Like, he used history as a blueprint.
He did. The source highlights a fascinating rabbinic concept known as Maaseh Avot Simon LeBanim.
Which translates to?
It translates to the deeds of the fathers are assigned to the sons. This is what we call narrative typology.
And Bates makes a very sharp point here in the essay to say this isn't just arbitrary allegory. It's not like later readers going back and retrofitting a hidden Da Vinci Code onto a historical text. This was a deliberate native compositional technique by the original author.
Exactly. Moses narrates earlier historical events specifically to serve as structural patterns for later ones. God's actions in the past form the mold for his actions in the future. So when New Testament writers read the Torah this way, they aren't inventing new meanings out of thin air. They are simply following the trajectories that Moses already painstakingly inscribed into the text.
The thematic matches are just undeniable once you see them. For example, Abram's sojourn in Egypt in Genesis 12. There's a severe famine. He goes down to Egypt. His wife is in danger. Plagues fall on Pharaoh's house because of it. And Abram eventually leaves with livestock, silver, and gold.
It's a perfect parallel.
Right. It is a deliberate, miniature, shot-for-shot preview of the entire national exodus that will happen generations later.
Or consider the use of the incredibly rare Hebrew word tiva.
The word for ark or basket.
Yes, it is only used twice in the entire Hebrew Bible. Just twice. Once for Noah's massive vessel that saves his family through the chaotic waters of global judgment, and once for the tiny, fragile basket that preserves the infant Moses through the chaotic, murderous waters of the Nile.
Wow. And both of those figures ultimately receive an architectural pattern directly from God, right? Noah gets the dimensions for the ark. Moses gets the dimensions for the tabernacle. Deliverance is constantly linked to God's sanctuary.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the most consequential of all these narrative typologies, the one that really drives the whole biblical theology forward, is the massive correspondence between Adam and Israel. The author of the essay, drawing on some great scholarship by Seth Postell, argues that Genesis 1 through 3 isn't just about the origins of humanity. It is basically a prophetic preview of Israel's entire national story.
Okay, let's trace the parallels between Adam and Israel, because when I read this part, the pieces just clicked together in my head. So Adam is placed in a sanctuary, the Garden of Eden, which is marked by the direct presence of God.
Right.
He's given a royal priestly commission to exercise dominion over the earth, and he is given a specific command in an environment of total blessing.
And when Adam fails, when he listens to the serpent and breaks the command, what happens? He is exiled eastward out of the sanctuary.
East of Eden. Now flash forward to Israel. They are redeemed from Egypt and placed in their own sanctuary, the Promised Land, which functions as this macro temple. They are commissioned as a kingdom of priests, and they are given the specific stipulations of the Sinai Covenant. And then, when they fail, when they rebel and break the covenant,
They are exiled eastward to Babylon.
yes, eastward. Adam is Israel written small, and Israel is Adam written large.
It's a stunning parallel. If the very first image bearer, in a state of unfallen perfection, couldn't sustain loyalty under just one single prohibition in a perfect sacred space, Moses is structurally showing us that Israel's history, trying to manage hundreds of commands in a deeply fallen world, is not going to magically restore humanity's access to God's presence. Adam and Israel both fall under the exact same blueprint. They both require a much deeper rescue.
Which brings us to the next massive question in our deep dive today. If Adam and Israel both failed under the exact same blueprint, and if the historical story is just this, typological map of failure pointing to a future hope, why did God bother giving Israel the 600-plus rules at Sinai in the first place?
That's the logical next question, right?
Yeah, if he knew it wouldn't work, what was the actual function of giving them all the minutiae of the law?
Well, to answer that accurately, we really have to dismantle a very traditional post-Reformation way of reading the text. For centuries, a lot of systematic theology has tried to manage the law of Moses by splitting it into three neat categories: moral, civil, and ceremonial.
Oh, I grew up hearing this all the time. The idea is that the moral laws, like the Ten Commandments, those stay forever, but the civil codes about ancient property disputes and the ceremonial laws about temple sacrifices and mixed fabrics, those are all expired and we can just ignore them.
Right. And it has a certain pedagogical utility in a modern classroom because it organizes things for us. But the essay rightly points out that this tripartite division is entirely foreign to the Hebrew canon.
It's not native to the text at all.
Not at all. An ancient Israelite didn't view wearing mixed fabrics as fundamentally different in source from the command, "do not murder." Both were spoken by Yahweh.
So it's a package deal.
Completely a package deal.
Right.
The New Testament writers, like James and Paul, they treat the law as an organic, indivisible whole. To fail in one point is to become accountable for all of it. Disobeying a so-called ceremonial command was considered rebellion against the Holy One who spoke it, just as much as breaking a moral one.
So if we drop that artificial three-part division, how should we actually understand the function of the law?
We look at the root word itself. The noun Torah actually derives from the Hebrew verb yara, which means to shoot, to point, or to instruct. The Torah was never meant to be an exhaustive, statutory jurisprudence that covers every single conceivable infraction of ancient life. It was meant to function as diagnostic wisdom.
A diagnostic mirror.
Yes. Think of the Holiness Code in Leviticus 19. It weaves judicial integrity in the courts, fairness in market weights, leaving the edges of your field unharvested for the poor, and the command to love your neighbor, all into a single, seamless relational field.
Wow, so it all blends together.
It does. The Torah displays Yahweh's perfect righteousness, and in doing so, it reflects back to Israel the reality of their own uncircumcised hearts. It acts as an MRI, diagnosing the terminal disease so they realize they desperately need the cure that was promised to Abraham.
Okay, this raises an important question, though. How did the New Testament writers actually view this function of the law? Because if you read some of Paul's letters, it can sometimes feel like he is just brutally harsh on the law.
That's where the Apostle Paul's concept in the book of Galatians is so incredibly illuminating. He asks the exact question we are asking, why then the law? And he answers that it was added because of transgressions until the promised offspring arrived. He calls the law our Paidagogos.
Paidagogos. What is the actual historical context for that in the ancient world? Because it sounds like pedagogue, like a teacher.
Right, but in a Greco-Roman household, a Paidagogos was not the primary teacher, and certainly not the headmaster. It was a supervisory slave. Their specific job was to restrain the child, discipline them, often carrying a rod corral them, and safely escort them through the dangerous streets to the one who would actually educate them.
Oh, I love this analogy. It's like a really strict, no-nonsense crossing guard.
Yes, exactly.
Their job isn't to sit you down at a desk and teach you advanced calculus. Their job is to put on the high-vis vest, blow the whistle aggressively, keep you from wandering into oncoming traffic, and safely deliver you to the actual school building where the real teacher is waiting for you.
That perfectly captures the historical role Sinai played for the nation of Israel. It defined what transgression was in stark terms. It corralled a rebellious people, and it demonstrated unequivocally that human beings cannot achieve justification by legal striving. It was a temporary, strict custodian that preserved the people until the promised seed, the Messiah, arrived on the scene.
Okay, so if the law is the crossing guard, who is the teacher it is ultimately leading us to, what happens when the hero of our mystery novel finally steps onto the page?
Well, the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 10.4 that Christ is the telos of the law.
Telos. And traditionally in English translations, that gets rendered as the end of the law, which sounds a lot like termination, like the law is dead, Jesus threw it in the trash, we're done with it.
Right, and that English translation has caused immense misunderstanding. While it can carry a secondary nuance of terminating a justifying regime, the primary overriding meaning of telos in this context is goal, climax, or culmination. Christ doesn't terminate the promised plan of God. He is the goal toward which the Torah was always aiming its arrow.
This aligns so perfectly with what Yeshua Jesus says in Matthew 5.17. He explicitly goes out of his way to say, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them."
And the Greek words he uses there carry massive historical weight. The word for abolish is katalush. In first-century Jewish memory, that specific word clustered around horrific national trauma.
Really? Like what?
It was associated with the Hellenizing crisis under the tyrant Antiochus IV a couple centuries earlier, where the goal was to violently erase Jewish identity, ban circumcision, and destroy the Torah. So Jesus is answering a charge that his new movement is destroying the Torah. He says, absolutely not. I didn't come to katalush the law. I came to plerush it.
To fulfill it.
To bring its prophetic trajectories to their ultimate goal. He came to actualize the divine will and to interpret those ancient commandments at the deepest, most piercing level of the human heart. That is why he goes on in the Sermon on the Mount to say that harbored anger is the root of murder, and internal lust is the root of adultery. He is recovering the deep relational holiness that was always the true goal of Leviticus.
So what does this all mean for the believer today? Like, if the law isn't abolished but fulfilled and brought to its climax in Christ, how does it actually operate now?
It means the substance of divine instruction doesn't disappear. The substrate changes.
Wait, the substrate? You
Right.
mean the actual material it is written on? Like, we're talking about moving from the physical stone tablets Moses brought down from the mountain to something else.
You are hitting on the core issue. We move from the broken external stone tablets of Sinai to the profound reality of the new covenant, which was prophesied by Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. God promised, I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes. The Holy Spirit now writes that very same Torah, that same divine instructional wisdom, onto living, circumcised human hearts.
Oh, wow. It's an internal transformation, not external compliance.
Exactly.
The mechanism changes. The Spirit empowers the person to actually fulfill the relational goal of the law, loving God and loving neighbor, which the external scaffolding could never force them to do. But wait, if a new covenant is here and it's internal, what happens to the ethnic nation of Israel who originally received the law? Does the church just like replace them?
The essay is very firm on a concept theologians call non-supersessionism, which is just a technical way of saying God has not replaced the Jewish people with a Christian church. The new covenant does not erase ethnic Israel's covenantal identity. The author points to Paul's famous analogy of the olive tree in Romans 11.
How does the olive tree work in this context?
So imagine the root of the tree is the unconditional Abrahamic promise, and the natural cultivated branches are Israel. Gentile believers are wild olive branches that get miraculously grafted in among the natural branches.
They become fellow citizens, partaking in the sap of the tree, but they don't chop down the original trunk to plant their own.
Precisely. Building on that, Gentile inclusion doesn't cancel God's irrevocable gifts to Israel. As Paul insists, God's calling is irrevocable. The ultimate eschatological horizon that Acherit HaYamim we talked about includes both the national regeneration of Israel and the ingathering of the nations. They stand together in the one, organically unfolding promise plan of God.
This has been such a profound journey today. I feel like we have moved completely away from seeing the Torah as this exhausting, static manual of rules where you just try to earn your righteousness by climbing a ladder.
It's exhausting just thinking about it that way.
It really is. But instead, we are looking at a living, dynamic, prophetic narrative. Moses literally designed it to anticipate our human failure, to act as a strict crossing guard keeping us alive, and to point us directly toward the last days when a Messiah king would arrive to change our very hearts from the inside out.
It changes everything about how you approach those ancient texts. They aren't dead letters on a page. They are the living, breathing trajectories that find their climax in the Messiah.
And that brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we've unpacked in this deep dive. If the Torah was always meant to be a diagnostic mirror exposing our deep need for a new heart, and if the Spirit of God now writes that very same instruction onto the living hearts of believers, how should you look at those ancient, obscure laws in Leviticus or Deuteronomy when you wake up tomorrow morning? What if you view them not as the discarded, irrelevant husks of a dead religion, or as a rigid instruction manual for ancient furniture you don't even own, but as the living shape of the love you are now actually empowered to give? What does your diagnostic mirror reflect today? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.